Environmental Alliance in the last local election. Eamonn has been no stranger to radical politics and one of the group who took over referendum offices in Derry to highlight their relationship with Israel's attack on Palestine and the West Bank. Thank you, Eamonn.
Okay, I think if you wanted a single phrase to sum up in broad terms what's going on in Maghaberry, at least sum up one aspect of it anyway, it would be quite simply that internment is back. Internment in the broad sense of people being imprisoned without any evidence being brought against them, but specifically if you look at the cases of Brendan Lillis and of Marion Price, it seems to me that internment is the only word accurately to describe the situation in which they find themselves. In both cases we have the revocation, if that's the word, the revoking of licences, not on the basis of any offence having been demonstrated, much less proven beyond a reasonable doubt, but on the say-so of the Secretary of State. And he reckons that something has been done that justifies him in revoking licences and telling people that they must go back and serve the remainder of a life sentence. I know a little bit about more about Marion's case, I think, than Brendan's. And I know Marion, that's because partly because I know Marion reasonably well. You mentioned sort of the early civil rights movement. I met her first on the Burn Tulloch March, and that's a long time ago, in January 1969. I heard her before I saw her because she never stopped talking. She was in the sort of ranks behind me. It's actually true of me. She used to tap you on the shoulder and say another thing, but they're talking until I used to shift my position on the march just to get away. Get a bit she could talk even then, but I know Marion sort of all that time, and I've never agreed with her politically. I'm not a Republican. I've never supported the strategy of armed struggle. Never supported it when it was the provisional IRA. He was mainly carrying it out, and don't support it now. The fact that I don't support the political strategy, either supported or alleged to be supported by prisoners, doesn't mean for a moment that I don't support the prisoners. One of the points I wanted to make in coming along here tonight is that it's possible to be 100% against the political strategy of some of the people in Maghaberry and still be 100% in favour of a campaign for decent treatment of the prisoners, for a recognition of their human rights and for their human worth, and of support for the release of those prisoners. I would support the release of them all, but the release certainly in the short term of prisoners whose health, state of health tells us sort of might die sort of before we actually get them out. In the case of Marion, the offence which landed her back in Maghaberry was to hold up a piece of paper at a 32-county sovereignty movement Easter commemoration, and on the traditional statement from what Republicans call the leadership was being read out on a rather blustery day and was being blown away from the lad who was reaching it. She reached up and held it for him so that he could read. This is not a criminal offence. Doesn't matter what was on it. It's not a criminal offence. There's no evidence available to Owen Patterson or David Ford or anybody else that the woman had any notion what was on the piece of paper, and even if she did have, to hold it up for somebody else to read it is not a criminal offence of any kind. Indeed, if it were a criminal offence, presumably she would have been charged with that criminal offence. But on that basis, and on the basis of other matters which we don't know about, because nobody will tell us about, she's landed back in Maghaberry. That's internment. Of course, when we say that Owen Patterson and Ford and the rest of them, that they are making these allegations that we are not allowed to know the nature of or the content of course it's not them who are making it. Owen Patterson doesn't go out and investigate things himself. And I would sort of do him the favour of saying that I don't imagine that he wakes up in the morning and says to himself, that my Brendan Lillis, Marion Price don't like the cut of their jib, I think I'll send them sort of back into Maghaberry. It doesn't work like that. Of course it doesn't. What happens is that, as they say themselves, they take security advice. security advice tells them that so-and-so is a desperado and will have to be got off the streets. Who gives them this security advice, do you think? Who gives it? Who's in charge? Who has the lead role in security matters, matters of national security in the north at the moment? Who is it? It's MI5. That is where this is coming from. These people are in Maghaberry prison on the say-so of a secret organisation which has been up to its eyebrows in lies, in fraud, in murder in the north of Ireland over recent years. It seems to me that on that basis, that that's what's happening. And given all the history that we've heard earlier, and all the history that we know, coming down through the ages, it is incumbent upon all those who want to see basic justice in our society. Leave aside for the moment now whether we're talking about whether we have advanced and whether we want to advance towards a united Ireland, or whether we're advancing towards socialism or anything else. Leave all that aside for the moment. It seems to me that common decency demands that people right across the political spectrum should come together as best they can to mount a major campaign on behalf of the prisoners in Maghaberry. And I think, unfortunately, if you like, that this is not going to be a short campaign. Even if we win in relation to one or two, there are prisoners, or half a dozen prisoners, or even of all the prisoners who are there at the moment, the indications are that this issue isn't going to go away, that there's going to be a need for continued mobilisation. And I would appeal specifically to people who might have problems with the political past and the political ideas of the prisoners. I would appeal to them specifically to become involved in the campaign and to make it as broad as is possible. And one of the difficulties, and we had this difficulty back in the 1980s as well, and also the people are, to some extent it's understandable, they're a wee bit nervous of the fact that if you stand up for so-and-so, you're going to be tarred with the same brush, and you might not want that. I mean, somebody remarked at a meeting like this in Derry a couple of weeks ago that somebody shouted, "You'll be associated with the dissidents now, McCann." And one person who is popularly regarded as perhaps being himself associated with the dissidents chipped up from the back and said, "He's already thought of as a dissident." You know, because I have never stinted sort of in coming out on issues like that. So there's a wee bit of a risk there. You know, sort of, but if you're serious about something, if you're serious about a belief in something as simple as justice, then sort of the way you might be smeared by people outside should not deter you and must not deter us from taking a stand. And I think that the more people do that, the less effective any smear will be. And people see sort of the breadth of it, and joining in a campaign, you're not joining in a particular political ideology, but joining in a broad campaign for decency and humanity in public life here. I think the campaign should go outside the north. I think, you know, sort of for as long as it's just associated with the north, it can't be dismissed. People still sort of, man, we had this for many years, of course. Sort of long stretches of the last 40 years where what was happening sort of in this part of the world could be dismissed as those sort of mad paddies and biddies over there sort of fighting among themselves with some crazy religious thing. Forget about it. It's got nothing to do with anybody else. This has got to do with everybody else. It is more clear now than it was in the early 1980s that the issues arising from the situation in Maghaberry are issues which affect and which demand the attention of people well beyond the north. I'll give you a simple example of what I'm talking about. The idea that a politician can sign a bit of paper consigning somebody to prison without telling that person or their legal representatives what it is that has resulted in them going to prison, sadly, this is no longer a specifically Northern Ireland phenomenon. There are Muslim people in Britain behind bars now who don't know why they are behind bars. There are people in internal exile in Britain, taken from their homes in London, sent up to the northeast of England, plunked down in some small town they've never been before, because it's too dangerous to leave them in London. Why? They're not told. Nobody knows. There are people deported as dangerous terrorists who are not told. and whose lawyers are not told why it is that they are being deported. Something to do with national security, and national security means we can't tell you what has happened. This is a Kafkaesque, if I pronounce the word correctly, a situation. And because there is that similarity or parallel across the water, I think that we should have a campaign which engages and has the involvement of the lawyers of those people and of those who are campaigning for them. Now, over there, when we opened the Museum of Free Dairy, run by the Bloody Sunday Trust, a couple of years back, we had Mozam Beg come over and perform the opening ceremony. Mozam, because the Bloody Sunday March all those years ago was a march against internment. Mozam had just been released at that time from Guantanamo Bay, where he had been interned. And that made a connection between what was happening sort of in the north of Ireland on the one hand, and what is happening in the wider world. I believe that there are people involved in campaigns across the water. I think they should be approached. I think they should be talked to. We should have pickets of the NIO office in London, more so than here. We should be carrying out this campaign as far as publicity is concerned in places like The Guardian rather than in the Irish News. And that's not to knock sort of doing it in the Irish News. Of course you need that for home consumption, as it were. But we have to spread it out. And it seems to me, and this is the concluding point I want to make, that would be better placed to do that if we have a single campaigning organisation. Whether it's called the Prisoners' Rights Campaign or something, we can come up with a name, that's not the matter. We should have a single organisation fighting for the rights of the prisoners in Maghaberry and prisoners generally and linking up with the outside world. We shouldn't have a little organisation here or even a medium-sized organisation in Belfast and one in Derry, sort of in others. I'm told when I say this, but there's all sorts of divisions within the jail. It's never going to work. Families are fighting with one another. Are they? I don't know this. Maybe it's true. If it's true, I don't care. The fact that people might have differences and argue them out, sort of in a jagged-edged way at times, doesn't mean that we on the outside who have the luxury to do it can't have a single focus and a single organisation. And I think that very rapidly, I actually, to be honest, don't know who organised this meeting. I'm delighted to be here, but I don't know if there's a committee as such or anything or a group, is there? Nobody can tell me that. I actually phoned up yesterday, somebody, I'm coming up to Belfast to speak at a meeting, and I got this terrible thought. Who am I going up to speak for? Up here, sort of, it's might be contaminated myself and all that there. I never got a clear answer, and I'm not worried about the clear answer. What I do say is that we should have a single organisation that can spread out, that can have representatives or components or solidarity groups, if you like, across the water. That can spread out them in Dublin, where some of the same issues can exist down there as well. So that to fight for the interests of prisoners and for the release of prisoners who are in there for political reasons. I believe that if we do that, we can make a difference. We've got a march planned in Derry for the 20th of August, sort of on this particular issue. Now, I'm not marching mad. So you have to calculate sometimes when you're looking at marches, are we going to get an adequate size? Because to march sort of with depleted forces can be negative.